Hey! Welcome to Sunny and Ratchet, your go-to spot for real talk and real laughs with your two favorite hosts who are spilling the tea, but not the wine.
Skies might be big, but the opinions are bigger. This is where you'll find your weekly dose of drama and magic, always served hot and slightly chaotic. I'm the one that likes to tell it like I see it.
And I'm the one who finds the silver lining, even if it's duct taped on.
We're just two women from the Midwest, one the ever optimist, and the other a realist, just trying to keep the train on the tracks.
So if you like gossip, world news, unsolicited advice, and good old-fashioned sarcasm, you're in the right spot.
This is Sunny and Ratchet. Pull up a chair and let's get into it.
This is a hot topic. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hey, this is Sunny and Ratchet, and we are here today with our guest, Miss Elaine, my mother, and we are going to get things going, talking about a pretty controversial topic.
Yes, but we are so glad that you're here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Yeah. Okay, so we are going to be talking about Roe versus Wade, and this is a very touchy subject for a lot of people, and we understand that. But we're just going to get into some facts. So here's some numbers, and this is for Oklahoma because this is where we reside currently. In 2020, there were approximately 4,000 abortions performed in Oklahoma. In 2021, there is about 6,000 reported in Oklahoma. In 2022, there was about 2,100 abortions performed in Oklahoma. And again, you're just going to have to remember that Roe versus Wade was overturned halfway through this year. So that's only for half a year. And in all of these years, I also want to point out that there was approximately 48,000 births every year. So these numbers, throwing that out there too. The first trimester is about 0 to 13 weeks, and 93% of the abortions are performed in this time frame. Main reasons, maternal health, diabetes, hypertension, cardiac issues, infections, as some infections and medical conditions can pose risks to fetus and mother. Personal reasons, obviously, like financial, lack of support, relationship issues, and personal circumstances. Second trimester, 14 to 20 weeks, 6% of abortions were performed. Main reason, maternal health risks and fetal abnormalities. I can't say this word correctly, and I apologize. And complications like ectopic pregnancies. Third trimester is categorized between 21 weeks and above, and 1% of abortions are performed in this time frame. Again, fetal abnormalities. Again, I apologize. And maternal health issues. And those are just some facts from our state. That's not counting the whole country. So I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Well, I would like to kind of talk about the past and look at Roe versus Wade itself. So Roe versus Wade came about in the 70s. Jane Roe was a woman named Nora McCorvey, and she was 23 years old. She had 2 children. She was pregnant with a third, and she was a waitress in Texas. In Texas, abortion was only legal to save a woman's life at the time, and she filed a suit. It lasted 3 years, so she did end up giving birth to that third child, gave it up for adoption. But this first lawsuit that was filed in Texas on behalf of Jane Roe was in May of 1970. It was filed against Henry Wade, the district attorney of Dallas County. Then you move forward to about 2.5 years later. So January of 1973, the Supreme Court rules 7-2 in favor of Jane Roe. The reason being is that women in the United States have a fundamental right to choose to have an abortion without excessive government restriction, and this struck down the abortion ban in Texas as unconstitutional, and this was in place for nearly 50 years. I would like to go ahead and turn now to Elaine, who was alive in this time and can kind of speak to what life was like at this time.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for wanting to share my grand story.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one thing that I would like to say before we get started is that, it's my understanding at least that when the Supreme Court handed down the Roe v. Wade decision, that it wasn't like a free-for-all, like any time throughout your pregnancy you could just decide to get an abortion. The viability point was set at 24 weeks. And up to that point, yeah, it was totally up to the mom as to what she wanted to do. But beyond that point, there had to be a good reason for doing that. So with that in mind, I was telling Shauna that I had originally thought I would talk about like the horror stories of, the back alley abortionists and dirty knitting needles and yeah, I know, rusting coat hangers and women drinking poison and doing really extreme things. That's how important it was to them not to carry a child to term. And now that it has been overturned, reversed with the Dobbs decision, even though it is now illegal again in many states, I want to point out what the cultural differences are now between now and then. One thing that is very different is that back in the day, there was no medication abortion. It was all like dilate and scrape. DNCs, yeah, there you go. And now, of course, with mifepristone, it makes it a lot easier. And there was no telehealth back then, for instance. You could, yeah. So that has made a big difference now, even after the reversal of the Roe v. Wade decision, and also the availability of better methods of preventing pregnancy now, as opposed to back then, because back then most women just relied on the rhythm system. They didn't have, even though birth control pills were approved by the FDA in 1960, they didn't really become widely available until the early 70s, just really shortly before the Roe v. Wade decision was handed down. And so, there were a lot of unwanted pregnancies back then. And a lot of women were just desperate, really desperate. For instance, Jane Roe. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, we have these advantages now that we didn't have back then. But on the other hand, there are some disadvantages, and I think that it's important to realize that even though it was illegal in most states before Roe v. Wade, the laws weren't nearly as draconian as they are now. You didn't have doctors that were afraid that they were going to be, lose their license and be put in prison and so forth for, doing an abortion, for medical reasons even, they're afraid of being second guessed now, whereas before that just didn't happen. And then another thing that's really kind of indirect is that back then, if a couple wanted to have a child but they couldn't conceive, adoption was really their only option. Mm-hmm. And so women who who were pregnant and gave birth but didn't want to raise the child, they at least, white women at least, knew that their baby would probably go to a good home. And for women of color, that was not the case, sadly. Whereas now IVF is available and so many people use it. I don't think that adoption is as good an option as it used to be. I don't think there are that many people who are looking to adopt children. So
I agree with that one.
yeah. So also, it's really, I think, hard for a lot of people here today to wrap their minds around what the culture was actually like back then. Because women, I know when I was in high school, in junior high school in the late 60s, it was like virtually all women were focused on getting through school and then getting married and raising children. That was just a woman's role. That's just what we did. And the ones that did go on to further schooling, education, it was often to nursing school or to become a teacher. The ones going to nursing school were hoping to find a doctor they could marry. And, it was very, very patriarchal and very repressive society, really. It was a girl's responsibility not to become sexually active. If she did, she was a bad girl. And if she got pregnant, that was really, you were kicked out of school. You had to carry this baby to term. You didn't have your friends anymore because nobody's parents would let your friends associate with you. And then after your baby was born, and, the idea of, a high school dropout girl, single girl with a baby, being able to support herself and a baby was, that just wouldn't work. So it was either put your child up for adoption, or maybe a family member would raise your child as their own, or your boyfriend would have to do the right thing by marrying you. And and often that boyfriend was in high school too, and taking on some menial, low-paying job. So then you're stuck in that cycle of poverty where you're raising children and living on next to nothing. So giving women the right to choose, I think, was very instrumental in bringing us up out of that. It was something that allowed, I think, the women's movement to flourish and allowed us to go to college and go on to become professionals and earn some respect. Because before then, women were really treated much like grown children. They weren't. Decisions meant if you went to the bank and wanted to withdraw money, it was like bankers calling the husband and asking if it's okay. Yeah, really, I'm not kidding you. And and honestly, if you were a woman who didn't want to get pregnant and you went to your family doctor because you didn't have your own doctor, you went to the family doctor, there were no HIPAA regulations, good chance the doctor's going to talk to your husband and ask, are you aware that your wife is asking for this? So it was a different world. And I think that a lot of what liberated us from that was the Roe v. Wade decision and better birth control, so that we were able to choose when or if we were going to have children.
I love this perspective so much. It hurts my heart, but I love it. And I feel like you are completely right. People need to remember that the time frames were completely different. And I'd hate to see us return to that.
And that's my fear. So there it is.
I love hearing you talk.
Oh my gosh, I do.
Yeah, I have so much respect for what you have to say. And for me, I feel like you've really helped to help me form opinions, but it's things that I don't know because I didn't live through that time.
Yeah.
And so to really hear it through your eyes, very helpful. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
Of course. I do want to talk about another story in the Midwest that started in the 70s around the time of Roe versus Wade, and it's the story of Dr. George Tiller. So he was a doctor in Kansas, but before that, he had served in the military. His father had a practice out in Wichita, or the Wichita area, and he had performed illegal abortions, but he was providing it as a service to provide a safe medical facility because of that concern for the horror stories, the coat hanger abortions and things like that. And so he wanted to do it in a safe way to at least save the lives, especially of the young mothers. So then 1970 comes along. George Tiller's just about done with his service, and his parents tragically die in a plane accident and a plane crash. And so he returns to Kansas with the intentions of kind of wrapping up their estate and closing down the clinic that his dad had for all those years. But then he's very moved by a story of a young woman who died trying to perform an illegal abortion with being pregnant with a baby that she did not want to have. And so from there, he decides to keep the practice open, and his story continues where he considers himself a woman-informed doctor. He really goes into performing a lot of late-term abortions, particularly, like, I think 3/4 of his client load after Roe versus Wade were teenagers that just really mentally, like, they hadn't admitted to themselves or to their family that they were pregnant until it was too late. And, despite, being a very active member in church, growing up in the Midwest, in a red state, serving in the military, all these things, he was very moved to serve women in the most extreme conditions. And he did it in the face of a lot of danger. There were lots of threats made upon his life. A woman attempted to assassinate him by shooting him 5 times, and the guy returned to work the next day. So he might have like down home with my dad, because that's something dad would do. But yeah, his clinic was firebombed, and then, posted a sign, and they still kept going, and it said, like, hell no, we won't go. He was he was an activist and really worked towards women's right to choose. And he eventually, it was May 31st of 2009, that an anti-abortion extremist entered his church where he was an usher, and he shot him and murdered him. And so Dr. Tiller really did bring a lot of attention. He was the only abortion provider in Wichita, Kansas for like 40 years. And there were a lot of peaceful and non-peaceful protests surrounding him. And I was very curious about, who was this person that was so determined. And, the people that worked with him that described him talked to him about being a very caring and compassionate man. And he was doing these things because in hearing their stories and hearing these situations, he believed that what he was doing was saving the life of the living woman or girl, really, teenager, and so that's why it was so important to him. And I think that his story is worth hearing because I think it's a big piece of the puzzle. It's relevant because it's, just up the road from Oklahoma, and it circles a lot around this Roe versus Wade decision as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to volley back to you, Ratchet.
So we're back to now today. The Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade June 24th of 22. It was in place for 50 years. I feel like that number needs to be stated because it was just 50 years that women had a voice and had a right to their own bodies. So, with it being overturned, the Supreme Court ruling ended the federal protection of abortion rights, allowing individual states to set their own policies and laws. A Mississippi law was banning nearly all abortions after 15 weeks of gestation as unconstitutional. Dobbs had argued that this constitution does not provide the right to abortion, and as a 10th Amendment that denied states power, like making treaties, but does not directly deny the power to restrict abortions. They also argued that liberty was written in the 14th Amendment, only implying fundamental rights that are rooted in the U.S. history and traditions, and abortion is not a fundamental right. That is why it was overturned. We all know the rest of the story, and here we are. Oklahoma is one of 12 states that has a total abortion ban with very limited exceptions. And that is just to preserve the mother's life. And in Oklahoma, you have to have medical documentation. And that is so hard to get in this day and age because nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows what they're needing. Doctors are afraid to touch you. So how are they going to get the documentation for an abortion? There's no exception for rape or incest, and as of January of 2024, an estimated rape-related pregnancies due to this ban in Oklahoma is over 4,500. And I need you to understand that. These women went through the assault, they had to go through the pregnancy, they have to go through labor and birth. I don't even know if people can comprehend how traumatic this must be for them. We are one of the second highest pregnancy-related prosecution states since Roe versus Wade. And from June of 22 to June of 23, there were at least 210 pregnancy-related prosecutions in the U.S. That is the highest documented prosecution rate in any year. Oklahoma had 68 of these. Most of these defendants nationwide are low income. That needs to be talked about. I feel like this is a very important point, and I keep looking at my notes because I want to make sure we're getting this correct. We have one of the most prosecutions for miscarriages in our country. It's sickening to me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I get that. Because I think, like Elaine was talking about earlier, is that, now people are very afraid of the legal repercussions, whereas that wasn't the case. That's when Roe versus Wade was overturned. Yeah. So that's one thing that makes this a very different, very distinct time. Very dangerous. Very dangerous.
Yeah. And in fact, there was a study that was done by one of our colleges. They had literally called 28 hospitals in our state asking about their abortions and what was needed. None of them had the same answer. None of them had the same information. And I think that's one of the biggest things that needs to be rectified, at least here in our state. They need to be definite guidelines for everybody. Because as a doctor, I couldn't imagine going to school for 12 years and then losing it all because I'm helping a patient out. I mean, you go into this field, I'm assuming, because you're wanting to help humanity.
Oh, yeah.
And then you're restricted by laws. You're going to be prosecuted if you help these women. You're going to lose your license if you help these women. They have families of their own. They have their own bills they have to pay. I don't blame them. There's been a lot of commentary out there about this being having the greatest effect and the most detriment to the poor, the low-income communities.
That's right.
Now, on that note, I'm going to flip-flop on you. Let's flip-flop. Because I do think it's important to see the other side.
100%.
Yeah. And so I did a lot of reading to be able to speak to that. And I found this in a lot of writings, and then one was particularly, I think, succinct, and I see it. It seems pretty fair to me. And this view rested on 3 pillars. The first one being science and their definition of life, and saying a human embryo, it is alive. It is a human life. And despite still being in the womb, it is still a separate entity from the mother, and that it's another sentient being. I think that one thing that really touches me about this is an experience I had, because I grew up being very informed, obviously, about the importance to women's rights and all of those things. But when I was pregnant with Speed Racer at 12 weeks, I bled out. My placenta had grown low, and I didn't know. I didn't know if I was miscarrying or what. Elaine had to drive me to the emergency room, and we were waiting, and I was prepared for losing my child. And then the ultrasound technician finally got there because it was in the middle of the night. And she performed the ultrasound, and I was looking at this 12-week-old baby, my baby, and his legs were kicking like crazy. His little leg, his hands, they were waving. In fact, I remember Elaine saying, "Look, he's waving at you." You could see his head and his little face, and that made such an impression on me. I had no idea that my little baby looked so human, was so active. It was amazing. And I absolutely understand that sentiment that these are babies. These are little humans.
Yeah.
They're little human beings. And it can be very heartbreaking and very tragic. And I understand the saying that this is a life and it matters too. And so, and I think that one of the things, that's mentioned here is that we're not looking so much at a question of science, we're looking at a question of philosophy. When do we say life begins? And they say philosophy doesn't matter because science says that this is a live human being, whether in the womb or born. The next point, the second pillar they land on, is human rights. And so because science says that the embryo or fetus is a human being, it is entitled to human rights. In fact, in this article, they don't refer to the fetus or embryo as an it. They refer to the embryo or fetus as a her, really kind of falling to that tangible idea of humanizing, yes. Yeah.
Not only that, since it's a her, you feel more.
Well, I think you're right. Yeah, I noticed that. I was like, is there a science twist?
There is.
Or is it emotion?
100%. Every fetus or baby, however you want to say it, starts off as a her.
Okay.
Every single one of us.
Oh, there you go. 100. There you are. Okay. Learn something for sure just now. So they're saying that, the fetus has human rights and everyone has value and everyone counts, even an unborn child. And then they kind of list some counter arguments here, saying that unborn humans are highly dependent on somebody else, obviously the mother hosting them, but
So are the elderly and the sick. They list that the mental functions like self-awareness may not be there, but it's really not there in infants or comatose patients or patients with advanced dementia, which,
Valid argument.
yeah, I feel like the dementia one might be a little bit, whatever. I see what they're saying. I see what they're putting out there. So they say that we all matter simply because we're human, whether we're born or unborn, we all matter. And it doesn't matter what we're capable of. It doesn't matter where we're at in our mental development. It doesn't matter any of that because we all count and we're all equal, including the unborn humans. So those two pillars, the science that she is a human and the thus being a human, this human is entitled to human rights. Their third pillar is that they bring in is love, which I do think is an answer to that argument when we're saying, well, you're saying that you're pro-birth because you want the baby to be born, but you're not concerned about what life looks like after birth. And so their argument is that both the baby and the mother do deserve love and support. So supporting the mother and being able to raise this child is, in fact, important. And so in their minds, and what's ideal is that abortion isn't the only alternative, that the mother can, like if the mother is concerned about finances, more support needs to be put towards giving the mother whatever assistance or support she needs to either raise the baby or find someone else to raise the baby, and not look at either I have to raise this baby alone or I have to abort the child. And that's where they're talking about that third pillar of love being like, let's love both of them. Let's support both of them. That we don't need to have just these two terrible alternatives, that they feel like there can be a good one. And so I wanted to speak to that because, you know, although I myself, like, I could never go through with having an abortion personally, I do understand all these situations I've never even had to deal with.
Thankfully, yeah.
Thank God. I do think that understanding empathy is what builds the bridge between us in a time when we're so divided. And so I do think it's important to kind of understand the place that they're coming from, people that we know and love, our friends around us, because we live in Oklahoma. Oklahoma is conservative. We have a lot of people that feel very pro-life, and there's different nuances to that. But I think it's important to understand that they're not all people that just want to reinforce the patriarchy. They're people that are thinking. They're highly focused on, yes, love, the fetus, the baby. And, you know, that focus may be more towards the fetus than what's happening to the mother. And it's a difference in point of view. It's a life or death. It's a life or death difference in point of view. But I think that it's important to know that, yes, it's rooted in love. It's rooted in this idea. I think, like, for me, that emotional response of seeing my son very much alive, that was the first time I questioned that kind of thing. Like, for a while, I was like, I'm not going to make a call. I'm not going to make a call on abortion, because seeing how human my son was at 12 weeks, like, I was so thankful that it wrecked me and all my ideas of it not being a human yet. Obviously, there's a lot out there. It's a complicated issue. It's just so complicated. I've heard a lot of stories where it just pains me for the person who's had to make a decision to have an abortion or not. And I know it's not easy.
No.
But I know that there are people that are pro-life and their intentions are so good. They're not thinking, like, I think that there's a lot of people out there that are pro-choice that also don't think that a woman who's been sexually assaulted should be forced to carry that child.
But there are a lot of people that do.
There are. I'm just saying, let's not categorize everybody in this extreme vote.
So I have a story. Because you were talking about Speed Racer and when you were pregnant with him. I had already had 3 children. I just moved here to Oklahoma, and I found out I was pregnant again. And it was my very first time ever experiencing an ice storm. You guys, I've never, ever, I mean, I've lived in Colorado, I've lived in Maine. Never have I ever experienced this type of weather. So I'm gonna state that I had found out I was pregnant, and I was bleeding. So I went to the ER, and they did an ultrasound. And I learned later that the tech had read the ultrasound to the radiologist because of the ice storm. He didn't want to come in. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what happened. And they told me that I had lost the baby. Instead of doing the DNC, they said they were going to give me some pills, 2-day pills. And they gave me that one that night, and I was going to come in the next day to get the second one. When I come in the next day, because I'm already distraught, it wasn't a planned pregnancy, but obviously I didn't want to lose this child. But I came in the next day for that second pill, and they rushed me into a room, which I should have known right then and there. Something was wrong. And a doctor came in and asked me if this was a planned pregnancy. And I said no. And they're like, okay, well, the report was read wrong. You hadn't lost the child. But since we had already given you that first dose of that medication, this child is going to be deformed. This child probably won't live outside the womb. And me and my husband at the time were very religious, so we were just like, whatever, like, we'll carry it as long as we can. And it took 6 weeks before that child died. I found out it was a girl. We named her and everything. If that had happened now, so after she had passed away, I had to have a DNC. And if that had happened now, what would have happened? Would I have been sitting there waiting? 6 weeks? What if I had decided I wanted to have a DNC then? Instead of carrying that emotional burden and angst and dread and grief for 6 weeks. I don't think that would have been fair for somebody else in that situation that didn't want to go through that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying mistakes happened, things happened, and I couldn't imagine being by myself in that situation and having to deal with that. That's my story about it.
So for me, that is where I remain pro-choice, is that there are so many stories out there of things that, like, it's such a crazy, wild, unpredictable thing. And really, these stories are our own to share or not share. And I guess, are we going to trust women to know their bodies and do what's best for them?
My opinion is, why aren't we? Or why aren't these decisions just made between that woman and her doctor?
Mm-hmm.
Why does the state or government feel like they need to be involved in our healthcare? I'm not for abortions. I'm not saying it is used for birth control, but I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying I don't believe in it personally for myself. I'm not in anybody else's shoes, though.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what they're going through in their situations. So how dare I judge that person for making a decision that I wouldn't make? That's my personal belief, FYI, me. So here are some of the fallouts from this decision being overturned. There was a woman in Oklahoma, and she was pregnant, and she found out it was a molar pregnancy. This pregnancy was never going to turn into a baby, but it was cancerous. She was denied care. She actually had to go out of state to get her abortion rather than wait for her health to decline to get help here in Oklahoma. Again, I can't imagine the stress and the anxiety and the pain that this woman had to have gone through in this situation. In Texas, there's an 18-year-old girl who died after 3 visits to the ER. The first visit, she was diagnosed, let me just reiterate, she is 6 months pregnant at this point. She's at her baby shower. She's in pain. She's bleeding. She's vomiting. And so she's going to the ER. So she's wanting this child. The first hospital diagnosed her with strep. There was no investigation on her abdominal pain, and she was sent home. The second hospital screened her for positive for sepsis and said the baby still had a heartbeat at 6 months and sent her home. The third hospital did 2 ultrasounds to confirm that the baby was, confirmed fetal demise. The nurse wrote before moving this woman to the ICU, no more than 2 hours after her arrival, her blood pressure had dropped. The RN noted that her lips were blue and dusty. She died hours later. I don't see how this is pro-life. There was also another woman, similar situation. So there's 2 women in Texas. And in Georgia, there was a woman who is 26 years old, Thurman, and she did want an abortion. She actually did want this abortion. She found out she was pregnant with twins at her 6 weeks. Like, she found out then. And in Georgia, that was their limit, 6 weeks and over, you can't get an abortion. So she actually drove 4 hours out of state to North Carolina and got the abortion pill. It was 2 doses. She took it, and she started having complications and bleeding. So she went to the hospital, and what did they say? She went to a hospital in Atlanta, and the doctors noted there were signs of infection. To avoid sepsis, you're supposed to start in, those antibiotics ASAP. This didn't happen for her. It was not until 2 p.m. the day that she had entered the hospital that she was brought in for that surgery, and she died on the operating table. She was a mother. She had a young son. These are just some horror stories. And in looking at these horror stories for this podcast, I kept coming across the Oklahoma being one of the worst, and only behind Texas and Mississippi. Our state's recent maternity mortality rate is at 31.9% of deaths per 100,000 births. This is above the national average of 26.3 deaths. Women in South Carolina, Georgia, Ohio, Arkansas, Texas, Mississippi, Oklahoma, and several other states have faced criminal prosecution because of abortion and stillbirths, because somebody is saying they didn't seek medical treatment, they aren't getting prenatal care, or they're disposing of the fetal remains inappropriately deemed by law enforcement or the prosecution. If you're having a miscarriage in the bathroom, right, what are you supposed to do? I don't understand that. So I think that Roe versus Wade being overturned, and again, this is my personal opinion, is going to affect women for generations, unfortunately. And you have been a witness to this and how it all began. And I fear that we're going to go right back to what you were stating earlier. Yeah. And then women aren't going to have a voice. Mm-hmm. So let's speak up.
That's what we're doing.
Let's do it. I love your passion. I do. I do. And your courage, because it is a very touchy subject. It's easy to shy away. I myself sometimes shy away because
it's a loaded issue.
it is so loaded. It is so loaded. And there's a lot of people out there that I love that through their life experiences, they're pro-life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want them to write me off. And so I avoid it. And that's one of the reasons I admire your courage so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I admire your heart. And this isn't a pro, whatever, but I do. Like I've told you 100,000 times. Like you've raised a woman who has a golden heart. And she is literally my compass. So where I would, start cussing somebody else, it's like, what was Shauna do?
I love that. Yeah. Well, next time I need to stick up for somebody, I'm gonna be like, what would Ratchet do?
You said something though, and I feel like this needs to be stated too. I may be pro-choice, but I would fight for anybody having the right to choose, or not choose. Like a woman shouldn't have to be forced to carry or terminate a pregnancy by anyone other than herself.
When I hear all of the stories out there of all the exceptions to just this easy cut and dry situation of abortion or no abortion, I realize it's so complex that I do feel like it should be in the hands of the person living it and the medical professionals that are treating it, and to really trust that they've gone to school all this time to be able to help make the right decision for the health of the mother and ideally for the baby too.
100%.
And
Without the mother, there's no baby. That's that point.
yes, without the mother, there is no baby. And we hear a lot of stories of women that losing their lives or nearly losing their lives. And so I think that's where the pro-choice, in my mind, really matters. I don't know everyone's story, and I don't have to. The mother and the medical providers, those are the ones that need to know the story and make the right decision for the situation. And I think the other thing here so what is scaring me is it almost seems like there's a legal witch hunt going on right now that, like you said, didn't happen before. Like, what? Why are we doing this right now?
I think it's a political cudgel.
Yeah. And that makes me sad. Yeah, that makes me really sad. I can see people saying, going through the process of using our legal institutions we have in place for what beliefs they have should be, even if we disagree, even if it's this damn important, Yeah. But the prosecuting to the point that people that are actually trying to seek the legal, it's not illegal, the healthcare that these women are looking for, aside from the one going out of state, which you could argue she was doing it legally because she went to a state where it was legal. These people are not the criminals we need to be worried about. These are not the people we need to keep off the street, And so that's the point that scares me the most right now.
I actually have a friend who has had an abortion, and I did ask her opinion and her thoughts on this. And she said that it was never an easy decision. It was never a decision that she wanted to have to make.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very hard decision, and it's something that she thinks about on a daily. But it was the right decision for her and her family.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that women are going into these facilities looking to get rid of these babies or fetuses, however you want to say it, just because they've contemplated this, they weighed their options, and unfortunately they have come to this decision.
Yeah.
I think for the most part that is true. Yeah. But here we are.
I nearly lost a friend because she was sexually assaulted on a first date. And wasn't trying to get pregnant, didn't expect to be pregnant, but found out about 4 weeks out when she, missed her period. And so she did like order some stuff online to do like a chemical abortion within herself, and she became very ill. She had a fever, she was vomiting. I could have ended up losing her. We all could have ended up losing her because she didn't want to have a baby as a result of a very traumatic sexual assault that she had experienced. And there wasn't an option for her. And I think that most people would agree that for her to then have to for her choice to be to carry the baby to term or risk her life that way and nearly die, those aren't good options. Those aren't acceptable options.
Well, I think that it's important to understand that you can make laws making abortion illegal, but it's not going to stop it from happening.
Oh yeah, it's just going to go back to what you were stating.
Yeah,
I mean, because there's women out there who have 8 children and they can't afford to feed that night. The waitress with 2 kids and another one on the way. Women who are assaulted. Children who are assaulted. God. So again, I feel like it needs to be just based between that person. I was going to say woman, but we're talking about children too in this situation, and that doctor. These decisions need to be made between those two only. I don't feel like the government, the state, has any right to be in a woman's reproductive health issue at all.
And what's interesting about that, I just think that it speaks to the idea that there's a lot of people, I think, feel like a lot of conservative people that feel like, the government, especially the federal government, that the government needs to kind of stay out of there.
Yeah, I know it's kind of ironic, but I think also the people who are pro-life, very often they're looking at that fetus as being a human being who can't speak for themselves, and they're protecting that individual's rights.
Yes, I really think that is the big key factor.
Yeah,
and I told you guys. I really, from my heart, I understand that.
Yeah,
I get that, and I can sympathize with that 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also not walking in that other woman's shoes.
Yeah. I think that it is good to have these conversations. I think it's good for them to be said, because if we don't speak and we're afraid to hear each other's points of views, then we go down that trail of just reinforcing our own beliefs rather than coming together and figuring out what really is best for everybody and how we can really protect our own rights.
I agree. That's a complicated issue, and I don't even know how to even remotely go to solve it.
I'm not on it.
Yeah. So, but I love you guys. I love our listeners. I hope that you guys were able to listen today and, I don't know, learn something, be inspired by something. I just hope it helps us all grow in this conversation.
Yes. Because even, every voice matters. So raise yours, whichever way it is.
Well, thank you guys for listening. And here is to Shouting into the Void.
Shouting into the void.